Hello YouTube and welcome to another Elder Scrolls lore video. Today we're talking about a popular sport played in Argonian society, Teeba Hatsei, a very complicated game that almost nobody, including me, seems to fully understand. So let's immediately start with the video and let me explain to you why it's so hard to understand. Alright, so Teeba Hatsei, or Hip and Tail Ball, as translated from the Jail, the Argonian language. This game, which is very elaborate and has a set of ever-changing rules, is by far the most popular sport played in Argonian culture. According to the lore, almost every town in Blackmarsh has a playing field for the game, and nearly every Argonian has played it at some part in their life. The game, while very popular with Argonians, hasn't become very popular outside of Blackmarsh, as a strong tail is required in order to play the game. So none of the other races are really able to play it, since the tail needs to be able to smash a really heavy ball. So Khajiit tails are almost always too weak to play, as their tail contains relatively little strong muscles. Due to the strange rule set of the game, almost no non-Argonians are able to understand the game, and neither do many Argonians themselves actually. While the base game rule set is quite simple, there are many small rules that may change at whim depending on where or with whom you're playing. So essentially, talking about the base rule set, this is how it works. In ideal conditions, the game is played on a field of dry mud and salt meadow hay, but can be played on almost any type of field, even a wet field like the one we see in Murkmire. The field has a mud wall and a totem of sorts on each side. With every field, the exact height of the mud wall and the size of the field differs. Then on most serious fields there are two reed hoops suspended above the field, one about 30 hands above the field and one 50 hands above the field, although the exact height of these hoops again varies per field and varies per who you're playing with. And the fields in poorer regions like Murkmire don't even have the hoop suspended above the field at all. Each team has 5 players and the game begins when the servers throw a special type of heavy ball, and a really heavy ball, called a Teeba, which is made out of the Pasa gum. They throw him skyward, and from the moment that the Teeba is thrown upwards, players are only allowed to touch the ball with their hips, elbows and their tails. At this point, the match becomes a battle for points. Players pass the ball from one to another in an effort to try and hit the opposing team's wall. Each time the mud wall on the other team's side is hit, then the team hitting the wall gets 1 point. If one of the teams reaches 10 points, the game is over and that team won. Simple enough, right? Well, yes, but there are more opportunities to score points during a game. For example, one can try to get the ball through the lower hoop suspended above the field. That hoop is very narrow and thus it's hard to hit, as the ball cannot be thrown through it during the serve, but it has to be smashed through the hoop with the hips, elbows or tails. Meanwhile, there's also the higher placed hoop. If one of the teams manages to get their ball through that hoop, the game is over and the team with the most points wins, regardless of what the stance of the points is. That could make for some interesting strategies. For example, if the opposing team is an excellent defender of their wall and you have a great tail aimer, someone who can aim very well with their tail smashes, you could try and have your team use the 3-point hoop and then the finisher loop to win the game with just 3 points, without even having to break through the defenses of the other party or them to reach you. But if you want to go for such a strategy, you'd have to have excellent aimers. Also, depending on where and with whom you're playing, and with what specific rule set you're playing, up to 6 balls can be used at once in the game, also pinning into the strategy. With this game, many setups are possible, and almost every Argonian has played the game at some point during their lives, with some playing it fervently or even as a career. The tail is by far the most important body part for the game, as it's used for the actual shots, since shots with the elbows and hips aren't as powerful, and thus easily blocked. And it's said that the best players are short and bulky Argonians with broad muscled tails and a good aim. But weaker Argonians that want to play the game usually wear wooden armor pieces to protect them from the impact of the, again, very heavy ball. But usually these weaker Argonians are made fun of by other Argonians, as they think that the armor on them looks ridiculous. But again, each type of player is suited for a different playstyle, and there are many different playstyles of the game. Like the Argonian culture itself, the game is always in flux, and its rules changes depend on where, with whom, and what type of the game you are playing, and whether you are playing it and in what time period you're playing it. For example, in Murkmire they play a variant where dancing, singing and specific poses like standing on your hands add to the game points. And then they play with more than one totem on each side of the field and one in the middle. In addition to that, there are many more local rules with every local variant of the game. For example, in the game we can hear an Argonian watching the game setup complain how one game team is in favor because apparently the other team has a player who hasn't been licked by the frog yet and thus isn't capable for left field. But in other regions, for example, there are other really specific rules such as rituals that come during the middle of the game or covering the ball in mud in specific stages of the play. Then there are some proposed variants where racers without a tail can play as well, but only they are allowed to use their feet for kicking the ball rather than smashing it with their tail. But many Argonians likely reject that rule set as they don't really like to play with non-Argonians, as they don't understand the rules of the game most of the time. That said, neither do many Argonians themselves. It seems that with simply going with the flow is what most of the Argonians do, just going with the local rules that local people make up. The specific rule additions don't seem to matter to the Argonians, as the fun seems to be in the fact that every game is different and ever-changing, just like their own culture is focused on change and the impermanent. That said, the standard rules of the game, the ones that I described, seems to be based on the Mesoamerican ball game. The ball game plays by most cultures in Mesoamerica, which is from like Mexico to Nicaragua. This game involved a very heavy ball that the players were supposed to pass to one another via the chest, hips and their elbows and smash them through several rings on each side of the playing field for points. Apparently, due to the sheer weight of this ball, many of the ancient people would get wounded during the game, and almost every town and city had some form of a playing field, just like with Teeba Hatsei in the Argonian culture, and just like they have a very heavy ball that has some weaker Argonians wear armor. So yeah, the similarities are pretty poignant. Anyway, that was everything I can tell you about the game Teeba Hatsei. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to know more lore about Argonians, I have several topics coming up, but for the time being there is my video about Gel, their language, which I can highly recommend watching, as it's very interesting to see how the Argonian language differs exactly from the other languages of Tamriel and our own. So check that out if you want to. Link is in the description. That said, before I end this video, allow me to thank my top patrons, Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Sword of Bushido, Zar Mikhail and Mr. Christmas. These, along with all the other Patreon supporters on screen, made this video and all my other videos possible, and for that I am very grateful. So, with that behind us, I will see you all next week in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. See ya!